All right, Psalm 61, let's call this one, Will I Remember My Vows? And this psalm that seems to also go along with that pray model, the PRA, asking God something, hopefully something legitimate or worthwhile based upon your recall of the things he's been willing to do in the past. And that all ties into the P, the praise. This time it's going to come in that order. We usually take it in the order of praise, recall, and then asking something legitimate of God, because that's the order we saw it in past chapters. But in this chapter, he is going to lead off with the request in verse 1. He's asking, hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth, I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you have been my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy. And that whole you have been indicating the recall. David recalling in this particular circumstance how God has come through for him and before, and thus he will not be unnecessarily anxious in this situation because he is confident that God can come through for him again, which is why in verse 4, he's going to say, let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. As in verse 5, he will go on to recall even more. For you, O God, have heard my vows. Thus the title of this chapter. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. As he goes on to make a further request, or he'll ask, prolong the life of the king. May his years endure to all generations. As he will conclude, we'll skip verse 7 and say in verse 8, so I will ever sing praises, that's the P, to your name as I perform my vows, that's the title, day after day. And the two things that stood out to me, obviously because of the title, were my vows, and then also that whole concept of my heritage, the vows being important because insofar as David is singing praises to God, we have talked about over and over again the necessity to have a healthy distance between our personality and our character, who we project and who we actually are. And so if David is going to praise God, he realizes the need not only to remember his vows, but to perform his vows, because praise without performing the vows can come off as fraudulent or fake, but performing the vows can alleviate David of the need to say a word. And so the fact that he is a man who is known for performing his vows to God still continues speaking, which reminded me of that whole concept of David's heritage, understanding that he was a man seated on the throne as he is asking God here to seat him and hold him up forever, understanding that Jesus was eventually going to come out of the line of David. And before Jesus, there were men like Solomon and reformers like Josiah and Hezekiah. And those men, even though the Josiahs and Hezekiahs might not have been as talented as a David or a Solomon, the evidence of God was still clear on the work that they were doing for God. And so, as we mentioned from time to time, that word heritage is related to the term inheritance, but the heritage differs in this way and probably doesn't really differ a whole lot. We simply just think of inheritance as what I get, whereas heritage reminds us that you also have an obligation to live up to the standard of men like David and Solomon, Hezekiah and Josiah, because not only did they receive a lot, they were men who led in a healthy direction with all that they had been given. And so understand, when you likewise have a heritage in God, even though you might not be a king seated on the throne of Israel, Jesus sent his apostles out in what we call the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, teaching them to observe everything that he had commanded them to do, understanding that that whole concept of being a disciple, we've distinguished it from being a teacher, because a teacher can impart head knowledge to you. A disciple is one who is looking for someone whose life they can emulate even beyond the learning that they can acquire. And so baptizing a disciple means that beyond what you already think you know about Jesus and what you're already willing to do to emulate his lifestyle, you are committed to living a life that continues to learn more than what you already know about Jesus, so that you can continue to emulate him fully. Those are your vows. And so much like David in his time of despair remembered his vows, one of the actual advantages we can have in periods of waiting or times when we think that things are not moving forward for us as quickly as they could, is they give us the opportunity to have God show us how we can tighten up the way we perform our vows to him.